Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new movie review, and as you can see this is a part of the series known as The Path to Infinity War, where I'm going to be looking back on each and every film within the Marvel Cinematic Universe up until the release of Avengers Infinity War. And continuing on with Phase 3, we head off right back into the cosmic side of the MCU, as we will be focusing on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, in which does have this strange legacy in that some people absolutely love the film, while others think that's either disappointing or just think it's flat out bad. And which camp do I personally fit in? Well, let's find out. Now, Guardians Volume 2 takes place 6 months after the events of the original film, in that Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket, Drax and Groot are now recognised as heroes, and that the team are trying to help Star-Lord by finding out the truth behind his true heritage. But along the way we have familiar faces as well as new enemies, and it's up to the Guardians of the Galaxy to once again guard the galaxy. Now, as you already know, I do love the original film and I was extremely hyped for the sequel, mainly because James Gunn and pretty much everyone else was back on board from the original onto the sequel. And so you would think that this would be a complete slam dunk, but what do I personally think of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? To be brutally honest, this film seriously pisses me off. And not because the movie is bad, far from it, but the movie itself is the embodiment of a mixed bag. And the reason why this movie pisses me off so much is the fact that there's no excuse for it to be this mediocre. With Iron Man 2, it was a mess mainly because of studio mandates, while Thor: The Dark World and Ant-Man also suffered mainly because of some behind the scenes drama. But when you're this far into the MCU, specifically in Phase 3, there's no excuse for these movies to be this meh. Especially since all of the talent from the last film are back in this film, and somehow it's a mess. Now, in terms of all of the characters, they are incredibly hit and miss for me, but one of the good characters is of course Star-Lord, played by Chris Pratt, and he is charming as always. And he does have a legitimate story arc that is really compelling and heartwarming. And the same could be said about Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon, because once again he was given a lot more depth this time around than he did in the first film. And like with Star-Lord, Rocket Raccoon does have a legitimate character arc in this film, and it is great to see more tragedy within the character. Zoe Saldana had a lot more to do as Gamora in this film, and it is great that at the very least she did have her own time to shine. Unfortunately, like in the first film, she gets overshadowed once again, and this time this actually comes from her sister Nebula. And I can't deny, at the very least Karen Gillan did a phenomenal job as Nebula and was also given a lot more to do in this film. Hell, she was probably one of my favourite characters. Although if there's one character who completely suffered in this film, it is of course Drax, and it pains me to say because I loved him in the first one. But this time around he had next to no purpose and he was almost mean-spirited at times. I don't blame Dave Bautista in this at all, and clearly he was having fun, but I just blame how he was written. And then speaking of returning characters who are just there, we also have Groot, and again he's only really there just to be that chippy sidekick, and also for some Baby Groot merchandise. And while we're on the subject of returning characters, I may as well talk about Yondu in this, who many people think that he's the major highlight in the entire film, and honestly, Yondu was the one who pissed me off the most. They tried to make him more of this heroic figure in which I just didn't buy it in the slightest. I didn't care about his redemption, I didn't care about his relationship with Star-Lord, and I didn't care the fact that he died. Oh, by the way, spoilers, but you know, this is over a year old at this point. Though if I was to give this film credit, it is of course the fact that it had a much better villain than in the first film. And Kurt Russell did a phenomenal job as Ego the Living Planet. He was intimidating, he was personal, and he had a pretty good plan. Although his methods were a little questionable. And speaking of newcomers, we also have Mantis, and she was just in the background, I guess? I'm not dissing Pom's performance or anything, but I just don't think this film was remotely a good introduction to her character. And then there's also Aisha, who I almost completely forgot was in the film, which is kinda laughable because she was promoted as one of the main villains, but really she was completely wasted. I actually remember Taserface more than Aisha, mainly because of that stupid gag that wasn't even funny to begin with. And speaking of jokes in this film, most of them just did not land at all and remind me of some of the cringiest jokes that came from Thor Ragnarok. But at the very least with Thor Ragnarok, they did have some funny jokes, but in this one, not a lot. Though going back to the positives, I do really like the visuals in this film because at the very least the colours were extremely poppin', and even some of the worlds were exciting to visit. Although what wasn't very exciting, and if anything forgettable, were of course the fight scenes. Because with the exception of that god awful climax, I honestly thought that none of the action scenes were even memorable in the slightest, and none of them could even stick out in my mind. But like I already said, I don't think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is even a bad film, but to me it's just painfully mediocre. And to me it's extremely painful because I don't even know how this even happened. And with every great thing that this movie has to offer, there's also something that's just completely insulting as well, and it just becomes this painful mixed bag. The characters were hit and miss, the story was hit and miss, some of the plot details were hit and miss, hell, even some of the CG was hit and miss. And I will admit that although there are worse MCU films out there, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the one that I dislike the most. And so for my final verdict for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I'm going to be very generous and give it a 6 out of 10. I was extremely tempted to give it a 5 or even a 4, but there are some genuine good characters and moments that are at the very least worth your time. And in the end, I did expect a lot more out of this film, and in a way, I do hate Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, mainly because it's so painfully mediocre, and there was just no excuse for it to be like this. So how do you feel about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? Do you agree with me in that it is incredibly disappointing, or do you think that I'm a little too harsh on the film? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.